that the judge made. Mr. Flynn accuses the government of suppressing certain information and alleges improprieties regarding the circumstances leading up to his guilty plea, including allegations of misconduct by the FBI, Department of Justice, and the Special Counsel's Office that, in his view, call into question the entire investigation, raise ethical concerns, warrant findings of civil contempt, and demand dismissal. Mr. Flynn fails to explain how most of the requested information that the government has not already provided to him is relevant and material to his underlying offense, willfully and knowingly making material false statements and omissions to the FBI. Wait a minute. The FBI altered the 302 forms, which were the foundation for the prosecution. So rather than directing this at General Flynn, he should be directing this at the prosecutors. You falsified evidence that was used in prosecuting General Flynn and coercing his plea deal. Instead, the judge is saying, you pled guilty, man. And because you pled guilty, you're not entitled to the information. Mr. Flynn claims that the government is still hiding countless text messages that are exculpatory, shows his innocence, and material. Well, the government disagrees. The prosecutors, the ones who were also knowledgeable about the 302 forms being changed but never said anything. Yeah, right. The government notes, and Mr. Flynn does not challenge, that it informed him about the existence of text messages and their import on November 30th, 2017, before Mr. Flynn signed the plea agreement and pled guilty on December 1st, 2017. And it later informed him that it had learned there were additional text messages that it did not have access to at the time. So they said, oh yeah, by the way, there are more of these things, but well, we're not sure. We're not sure. Trust us. We're not sure what's in them. But there are more of them. That's what they told his former attorneys, Eric Holder's partners. Yeah. His attorneys and General Flynn. Mr. Flynn misconstrues Brady and its progeny in two fundamental ways. First, Mr. Flynn asserts that he was entitled to all the Brady evidence, the evidence that shows he's innocent, in the government's possession well before November 2017. So, what the judge... Wait a minute. The government responds that Brady imposes no such requirement for uncharged individuals. Okay, so because he was not charged prior to the end of November, what the judge is saying is, well, you weren't entitled to that evidence that shows that you're innocent that the government was holding prior to you being charged, of which you pled guilty. So there's evidence that shows he's innocent that the government is holding, is not sharing. And the judge says, well, no such requirement there was no such requirement that they turned that over because you were uncharged at the time. I mean, this is a goat rodeo. Mr. Flynn pled guilty to the underlying offense with the knowledge of, 1, the import of the Strzok page text messages, and 2, the IG's report concerning the text messages, which were released before Mr. Flynn's original sentencing hearing in December of 2018. So now the judge is saying, well, look, by the way, when we first were going to do your sentencing a year ago in December 2018, you were aware that by then it was public knowledge about the Strzok page texts and how they were, biased toward Trump and you and everyone in the administration. And you still, when I asked you about, do you still want to hold your guilty plea in December 2018, you said, I'm going to hold that. Prior to Mr. Flynn's acceptance of the plea agreement in December 2017, the government informed Mr. Flynn that Mr. Strzok said that Mr. Flynn had a, quote, sure demeanor and did not give any indicators of deception during the interview, end quote. And, quote, both interviewing agents had the impression at the time that Mr. Flynn was not lying or did not think he was lying, end quote. Yet, they charged him with lying to the FBI. How could that be? How about because the 302 forms were changed by Lisa Page and Andrew McCabe to make it look like he lied? Those impressions, however, do not exonerate Mr. Flynn of his crime in this case. The court is not persuaded by Mr. Flynn's arguments, although there is no exact deadline for the production of Brady material, material that shows the innocence of the defendant, in this case General Flynn. It is a long-standing constitutional principle that as long as a defendant possesses Brady evidence in time for its effective use, the government has not deprived the defendant of due process of law simply because it did not produce the evidence sooner. So in other words, even though they withheld that evidence, and even though some of that evidence became public knowledge prior to your sentencing, well, you still pled guilty. And Brady does not extend to information that is not within the government's possession. So in other words, there are all these texts. Remember they said earlier in this text that, well, the prosecutors didn't have, but, well, the FBI had it, but they didn't turn it over to the prosecutors. Here the government maintains that before the parties entered into the plea agreement, it disclosed to Mr. Flynn the existence of, but not the actual Strzok Page electronic communications of which it was aware at the time and responded to former defense counsel's questions regarding those communications. So here's the prosecutors go, yeah, there are these Strzok Page things, and well, they say that he didn't lie, and well, and there's some other things about, but we don't really know what's in them. And because you were made aware of their existence even though they didn't tell you what was in them, and you still pled guilty, well, you can't get them now. And you can't get any of this other information now because you pled guilty. And then a year later, in December 2018, when the judge asked you the judge, Sullivan, asked you if you wanted to maintain your guilty plea, you said yes. Well, there's a couple whoppers in here I want to hit you with. The government points out, and Mr. Flynn does not dispute, that he made false statements to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. Yeah, because he was coerced, right? And those same false statements were repeated to the Vice President of the United States, the White House Chief of Staff, and the White House Press Secretary, and the Washington Post. The court therefore finds that the notes, the draft 302s, the final 302, February 15, 2017, edited, provide ample support that Mr. Flynn made false statements to the FBI about his communications with the Russian ambassador regarding his request that foreign officials vote against or delay the UN Security Council resolution. Mr. Flynn's multiple false statements were material regardless of the intervening FBI's knowledge of any recordings and transcripts of the conversations with the Russian ambassador, the existence or non-existence of which have neither been confirmed nor denied by the government. Okay, whenever they say that is neither confirmed nor denied, it means it exists. Because if it didn't exist, they would be right front and center saying it doesn't exist. Whenever they say neither been confirmed nor denied, that means it exists. And whether the FBI had knowledge of Mr. Flynn's exact words during those conversations. Flynn claims that the FBI manipulated the 302 because substantive changes were made. Mr. Flynn points out to the Strzok Page text messages the night of February 10th, 2017, and Ms. Page's edits to certain portions of the 302 that were material. To the extent Mr. Flynn has not already been provided with the requested information, and to the extent the information exists, which they state it does, the court is not persuaded that Mr. Flynn's arguments demonstrate that he is entitled to the requested information. He's not entitled. They admit the changes were made. He's not entitled because he said, well, sorry, you pled guilty. Shouldn't have pled guilty in December 2017 that your other attorneys told you to do. And when you were with those other attorneys a year ago in December 2018, and I asked you, do you want to pull back your guilty plea? They told you not to do it. You didn't do it. So you're not entitled to the information, even though it shows the 302 forms have been edited. The court rejects Mr. Flynn's request for additional information regarding the drafting process for the 302s and to search for the original 302. They're admitting it's missing. Quote, missing. Because the interviewing FBI agents notes the draft interview reports the final version of the 302 and Mr. Flynn's own admissions of his false statements make clear that Mr. Flynn made those false statements. In other words, because you signed the plea agreement that said you were guilty, tough luck, buddy. And he signed the plea agreement because they were coercing him about possibly prosecuting his kid. General Flynn seeks a full unredacted and copies of the recordings of Mr. Flynn's calls with Ambassador Kislyak or anyone else that were reviewed or used in any way by the FBI or the Special Counsel's Office in an evaluation of charges against Mr. Flynn. The government responds that whether or not such information exists, if it didn't, they would say, so it does exist, it does not pertain to information that would be favorable or material to sentencing. So in other words, yeah, this exists, but we're not going to give it to you because, well, it has nothing to do with how I'm going to sentence you. Because you signed the plea agreement in December 2017, and because, well, when I asked you in December 18th if you wanted to pull it back, you said no. General Flynn seeks information about any parts of any polygraph examinations failed by Mr. Strzok after Mr. Flynn was first the subject of any FBI investigation, authorized or unauthorized. Oh, so apparently Strzok failed a polygraph. And Flynn and Sidney Powell say, we want that. Could maybe Strzok have been asked, do you confirm that the 302 forms were changed? The government neither confirms nor denies the existence of this information. What does that mean? It exists. The government responds that such information, whether or not it exists, is not helpful to Mr. Flynn because it is not favorable or material to sentencing. In other words, the judge is saying that information, well, it's not going to determine whether I give you a year or I give you 5 years. I kid you not. When a criminal listen to this. Here it all is in a big ball of wax. When a criminal defendant enters a guilty plea, he may not thereafter raise independent claims relating to the deprivation of constitutional rights that occurred prior to the entry of the guilty plea. A valid guilty plea also renders irrelevant related government conduct that takes place before the plea is entered. In other words, because you pled guilty in December 2017, well, you don't have any constitutional rights. The constitutional rights which would allow you access to this information that shows you're innocent. Oh, and by the way, because you signed this guilty plea, whatever the prosecutors did beforehand and the FBI did beforehand, Well, because you signed the guilty plea, it doesn't matter. The sworn statements of Mr. Flynn and his former counsel belie his new claims of innocence and his new assertions that he was pressured into pleading guilty to making material false statements to the FBI. Well, because you signed the guilty plea, and because when Judge Sullivan said, I asked you in December 2018 whether you wanted to pull back your guilty plea, doesn't matter if you were being coerced, because I asked you in December of 2018, Sullivan said, and you didn't pull it back. By pleading guilty in this case, Mr. Flynn agrees to waive certain rights afforded by the Constitution of the United States, including to challenge the admissibility of evidence offered against him. Because his guilty plea effectively bars him from raising claims based on any evidence obtained in violation of the Fourth Amendment, Mr. Flynn is not entitled to the information requested. The government argues that Mr. Flynn makes no mention of his plea agreement in which he waived his right to challenge the admissibility of the evidence against him. The government correctly notes that a criminal defendant may waive his constitutional and statutory rights under certain circumstances so long as it is a knowing and voluntary waiver. A guilty plea results in the defendant's loss of any meaningful opportunity he might otherwise have had to challenge the admissibility of evidence obtained in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The requested information regarding the FISA applications. Yeah, the ones that Horowitz found to be illegally obtained. Do not pertain to information that would be favorable material to sentencing. In other words, the judge is saying, yeah, well, Horowitz found that, but hey, it's not going to alter whether I give you a year or 5 years. Mr. Flynn fails to offer a specific response to the government's arguments. Instead, he posits that the FBI and the Department of Justice had no legal basis to obtain a FISA warrant against Carter Page or to investigate Mr. Flynn. My question to that is, why did the judge delay this decision? Because he delayed it based on what Horowitz was going to find and put forward. According to the judge, it didn't matter what was determined in FISA and Horowitz's investigation. So why did the judge delay it? To be sure, Mr. Flynn was aware of the circumstances of the January 24, 2017 interview and the allegations of misconduct against the FBI officials before he entered his guilty plea in December of 2017. Mr. Flynn did not challenge those circumstances, and he stated under oath that he was aware that lying to the FBI was a crime. In response to this court's questions in December 2018, Mr. Flynn maintained his guilty plea. Therefore, not entitled to the information that shows that he's innocent. Makes you sick. Absolutely sick. Go back to what I first said. Judge Sullivan, in this case, could have upheld the rule of law. Instead, he upheld a political hit job that was tainted. A hit job by the deep state. What's my bottom line? My bottom line is that Judge Sullivan in 2009 that dismissed that case, but remember why he dismissed it. It's because a prosecutor came forward and said, we lied. We were holding stuff back. What these guys are saying in 2019, these prosecutors, yeah, we got the stuff, but we're not handing it over. And we're not handing it over because he pled guilty, even though it shows he's innocent. One would have hoped that the Judge Sullivan from 2009 would have stepped up to the plate. Instead, the Judge Sullivan of 2019 didn't uphold the rule of law, at least in my opinion, and many other people's opinions. But he upheld a political hit job. It's that simple. What's next? Well, we'll find out from Sidney Powell soon enough. I see it, her options are to do nothing, to go to sentencing. That occurs, I believe General Flynn will go to jail, go to prison. She could appeal. I hope she does. She could petition the court to change General Flynn's guilty plea to innocence. If she does that, what will Sullivan do? What do I think he'll do based on this? I think he'll say, look, General Flynn signed a guilty plea in 2017. He knew there was some exculpatory evidence, didn't know what it was. In fact, some of that evidence didn't come available until October of 2019 about Lisa Page and Andrew McCabe editing the 302 forms of which his prosecution was based. But nonetheless, he knew there was something out there, still pled guilty. Was that because he was being coerced because his son might be prosecuted? Possibly. I believe it is. That was the case. But I believe Judge Sullivan will say, well, you know, he filed the guilty plea in 2017 and he was told there was exculpatory. He still signed it. And when he came up in front of me in 2018, a year later, I said, hey, I got some, and rightfully so. Let's give him at least a little bit of credit. He said, I got some real questions about this. You want to pull back your guilty plea? He didn't do it again. Now, could that have been because he knew if he pulled back his guilty plea, even then, the prosecutors would have gone after his kid? Yeah. But he didn't pull it back. And I believe Sullivan will say, too late. Can't pull back that guilty plea. I gave him a shot a year ago. He didn't take it. The other option is what happened in the Ted Stevens case. That a member of the prosecution team comes forward and fesses up. We had the exculpatory information long before General Flynn pled guilty. And we didn't provide him the details, and we didn't provide him or his attorneys the information. That's what happened in the Ted Stevens case. That's relying on a prosecutor to have the courage to come forward, similar to what happened in 2009. We could only hope that that would happen. I'm not counting on it. The deep state is deep, and the swamp is incredibly deep. The other option is that President Trump issues a pardon. Those are the options on the table. Maybe there are more. Sidney Powell has a brilliant legal mind. And if it were not for her, I believe General Flynn would have been in prison long ago. It's because of Sidney Powell's courage, the courage of General Flynn to take on the deep state, the courage of every member of his family, why he's still a free man. And hopefully, some semblance of some common sense will come into this picture, and the rule of law will rear its head, and he will remain a free man. Because it's not just his freedom on the line. It's yours. It's mine. It's 320 million Americans' freedom on the line. If it can happen to him, a general, a hero, it can happen to every one of us, only much quicker and much faster. That's where we are. I thank you for your time. Until next time, Dave Jan is signing off. Dream big. and dare to fail. Thank you for your support of this platform. Without you, the subscribers to our premium content, this platform, the radio show, the YouTube channel would not exist. I thank you for stepping up and supporting our freedom-based efforts. A lot of people talk the talk about supporting freedom, but they never walk the walk. They just think it's all free. Freedom isn't cheap. It's not cheap. And each and every one of us pays a price in many different ways. I thank you for supporting this platform and allowing us to present this information. Dream big and dare to fail.